There it goes. All right, let's call this April 9th meeting of the City of West Sacramento, regular meeting of the Environment and Utilities Commission to order. And we'll start, as always, with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Do we have any presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the Commission?
There are none.
No members of the public present. We'll move on to item 1B, Commissioner Communications. Have there been any?
No.
All right. Very good. Let's move to item 2, the consent agenda, consideration of approval of the minutes of March 12th, 2018. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve.
I second that.
Was a tie.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. The minutes are approved. Let's move to item 3. Facilities licensing agreements to support 5G wireless communications.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner and members of the Commission. My name is Mark Zolo, and I work in the Community Development Department. And this item will provide an overview on a facilities agreement between the city and AT&T, and it's one of the actions that is an extension of the broadband assessment and action plan that we brought to the Commission last year. A couple action items on the plan first that I'd like to touch on. One, we did a follow-up survey in the North Area neighborhoods to get a more granular idea of how people were accessing the internet in North Area neighborhoods. We were concerned that the CPUC data and the data we collected by telephone surveys wasn't quite accurate. We were able to use the BB Can and a group of volunteers from the Mormon Church to go out and do a door-to-door survey of a random sample of all of the North Area neighborhoods north of the Barge Canal. And we were really quite pleased with what we found. Given the constraints of keeping 100 volunteers on task and not taking up all their time on a Saturday, we weren't able to get a statistically significant sample, but we were able to get 104 or 107 responses, and we found that of those 104, 93% were accessing the internet. They were doing that through wireline communications and through mobile. They were doing it through basic email and chat rooms, but also demonstrating a degree of actualization. They were doing their banking online. They were shopping on bank. They were doing their homework online. They were doing job-related work online. And also, of that group of people who responded, those over 55, 81% were using the internet. So we were really, that conformed with the larger scale data, and although we can't ascribe statistical strength to it, we're really happy with what we found out of that sample population of the North Area neighborhoods. So that was a good sign. We also were able to lease some of the city's infrastructure, some of the conduit we have, to one of the fiber suppliers and carriers in the region, and that is in keeping with the council's desire to maximize the infrastructure we do have, and also improve broadband service. And what that lease did was allowed this carrier to connect to 3 cell sites in the south area of the city, which prior to that connection onto fiber, they were using microwaves to communicate. So putting them back onto a fiber backbone improved communication services throughout the community, just right there on that one changeover. It also put fiber onto port-owned properties and proximity to other port properties, so that'll help market those properties for development purposes. And lastly, we are able to get 12 strands of fiber for city use that go all the way from up by Rayleigh's headquarters all the way down to the southern city limits. So we can use those maybe for parks. We'll use it for some infrastructure and stuff like that. So that was a pretty good deal, we thought. On the not so good side, we haven't had much luck in figuring out a way to get more fiber into the Southport industrial area. It's interesting. We've spoke with a number of businesses, and although they don't really like their internet service per se, it's not their first order of business. They're more focused on their business rather than getting better fiber. So we haven't really been able to get much luck in engaging them. And on the carrier side, we spoke to Verizon that has a project that's going to be going through the neighborhood, and we offered up some of our right-of-way, which would put them in proximity to Southport Industrial Park businesses, which is one of their stated goals in deploying fiber. But we found out that a lot of these fiber conversion projects are about getting Verizon assets onto Verizon fiber, which means that they're about an internal rate of return. By not paying rent to outside fiber providers, they immediately convert a rent into a revenue stream and improves their bottom line. So their focus is on getting those projects done as fast as possible. So rather than focusing on putting them in proximity to customers, they're more about like, can you get us the permits faster? Can you get us through it faster so we get in the ground faster because we want to do it this fiscal year? And so they're looking at all these projects across the United States, and they're looking at the ones they can do this year, which improves their rate of internal return. So it's hard getting their attention to do more forward-thinking fiber builds and stuff like that. And also, in the very south end of town, where it's still kind of a rural transact, although it's going to improve over time and probably sooner than we think because of 5G, it's still very hard to get even an independent carrier to focus on doing a project in the very south end of the town because the customer density is so low. So we're still kind of like working with that to see if we can find something that can improve broadband service down that way. But that said, we've made some progress. And recently, we signed a facilities license agreement with AT&T, and this is probably like the first step into the 5G waters that we're taking with a carrier. And this license agreement is intended to help facilitate the deployment of 5G structure. And if you saw from the packet, you're going to start seeing a lot of these Cantana devices show up on streetlight poles and maybe traffic signals too. And the way 5G will work is that it'll be a point-to-point-to-point distribution of cellular networks. And there's going to be a huge amount of benefit from that. But it's going to be a huge amount of work, too, for the carriers and for cities and for West Sacramento to process these permits and make sure they work in our community. So two things about that. You may have heard that Verizon is doing a pretty extensive build in Sacramento proper. That is, according to Verizon, a pure 5G play where the technologies they're going to use are 5G all the way through. And by that, I mean 5G is both a technology and it's a brand. So everybody's touting 5G right now, but how it's going to be implemented is a range of things. It could be what current network topology is now, which is like an extension of 4G, or they could jump right into, and I think this is the case with the Sacramento project, using pure 5G technologies. AT&T has stated that their initial goals with 5G are to reduce congestion and reduce latency. So they're taking a little bit more of an evolutionary approach. And so they came to us and they wanted to talk to us about setting up this agreement to help facilitate how they can get their projects reviewed and permitted and built more as a partnership rather than as a customer or out through the door, relationship, a cold relationship. So What they're going to do, their first project is a set of 6 locations around IKEA and Highway 80. As you can imagine, that's an area where there's a lot of congestion. And they're going to do their first project in West Sacramento there and test how the agreement will work and how we'll throughput permits and how the technology will work. Where it goes from there, we don't know. We expect that once 5G starts to roll out, it's going to be pretty busy in a lot of communities across the nation. There's billions of dollars that have been budgeted for these projects. So that's on the way. And once we inked the agreement with AT&T, staff started to think about how it was going to work and realized that we have 2 areas we need to focus on right now to make sure this works well. One is design guidelines, because there have been bad actors that have been hanging equipment on poles and not the equipment that's anticipated or envisioned by AT&T, but just ad hoc. If something comes up and a carrier will see equipment on a pole and just put their equipment on a pole with them or have a sub-agreement, and we don't want that. And the first way to prevent that from happening is by establishing guidelines. The second part is that since they'll be on our infrastructure, there's the added evaluation about how the utility cost is going to be managed and the structural issues with that. So both our street light function and the wireless function can coexist properly on the pole or on the infrastructure. So staff right now is taking some proposals to find a consultant that could do the design reviews, the permit packaging, and the building inspection so that we can do this in a timely process. The agreement has cost reimbursement language in that so that the carriers are paying for those costs. There's a minor rent for being on our poles, and they pay for the utilities. And we think we're going to be able to work. It's going to be fast, though. So it's kind of good that we're having this first 6-pole submittal come in so we can look at it in whole and see how it's going to function, where the hiccups might be, et cetera. I think that is pretty much what I have to say about it right now. And I'll be happy to take any questions from the commission on it. And Randy's here to speak to the solicitation and how it's going to work for his processes, too.
I have a question, if I may. So I see the annual rent is the $250. I saw that on page 10 of the, it's detailed there. From my understanding, oftentimes cities will have a interest, like an annual, some kind of incremental interest on that, or is that $250 in perpetuity? Like
it's the agreement has language in there. It has 2. Actually, I should touch on this too. It has 2 things. One, there is a time limit on the agreement, and there's terms in there to revisit the rate. The rate may be preempted by state legislation at some point. SB 649 attempted to do that, and that's to help provide certainty on cost. We've seen some pretty wild rents out there, and some communities have been able to get some of those rents. And I don't know if they've been able to do that on 5G. The Verizon project, for example, has some interesting rents, but it also has other terms in it. So you see revenues going in and coming out. So it's more like a development agreement sort of thing where both parties have obligations, both financial and performance. Our agreement reflects the council's interest in getting broadband deployed in the city. And I'll touch back on the fiber conduit lease deal we did with the local carrier. That path of travel goes through the Bridge District, and we have a lot of money invested in the Bridge District and in those pipes that went in the ground. And it crosses the McGowan Bridge, which in itself is a big deal because you're crossing, not only are you crossing water, you're crossing a federal levee too, and that is worth a lot. And we priced the original lease rate to reflect that avoided cost that they would have trying to get across that water and across that levee on their own. And it killed the deal. They said they can't do it. The lease rate would just be too high. And they wanted to keep it more towards what the lease rates are between carriers. And so we brought it back to both the Port Commission and the council and said, what's what's more important? Are we rent seekers, or do we want to help facilitate the deployment of the infrastructure? And the council is pretty clear that they want to see the infrastructure. So although it's always good to get more rent, we're really focused on some rent, because there's rent between these carriers in the industry, but not a focus on rent, mostly focusing on getting the infrastructure built and deployed and used by the community.
So what is the timeline then on that? Could you remind me so you said it's got, there's some language in there that you'd be revisiting.
Yeah, it's like I think the term is like 5 years or something like that. And there were some other escalators. So there's two mechanisms. One, if it gets preempted by a late state legislating like 649, or on the terms in the agreement, we can revisit it, because the agreement rewinds every once in a while, and it gives us a chance to look at the costs to see what's going on in the industry and what's going on elsewhere. It's about being contemporary with the industry, right? Rather than trying to, hammer the best hard deal you can get. So we think it's pretty fair.
Okay, no, I was wondering because others, like you had mentioned, other cities will have set, sometimes very large rent fees, or maybe they're more reasonable or industry standard,
Yeah.
But I often saw some kind of annual increase, like a small increment, like I said,
Yeah.
between 1% and 4% or something like that.
This one's not hard-coded. It's based on the cycle of the agreement being renewed. So it cracks it open. We'll look at it, see what's going on in the industry. Most of our cell tower leases do have card-coded escalators in them, but in this case, not so much. And like the Verizon agreement, the terms I saw, and I haven't seen them firsthand in the agreement, just how they were reported. They were like first-class office space for a utility pole, which I thought was kind of wow. So I don't know. Again, like I said, there's money coming in one side into Sacramento, and on the other side, they're paying it out. So I don't know. It's a bigger deal. It's more complex. It involves fiber infrastructure and services that the city desires and stuff like that. So I'm not party to that. So I can't really speak to it with any detail.
So once this initial pilot study is completed over in the IKEA area, what are the plans for rolling it out across the rest of the city? Do we have plans, or we're just kind of waiting to see what happens over there? So
I keep trying to be friendly with them, but they won't tell me. They're just like they won't commit to like build timelines at all. And like I said, AT&T is mostly focused on congestion, so I imagine we'll start to see these pop up where there's congestion. And interestingly, too, this small cells like these may help solve the NIMBY problem that we have, like down in Bridgeway Lakes, where there's a pretty strong aversion to a cell tower in the neighborhood. So this may be a way to resolve capacity and throughput in Bridgeway Lake without resorting to a traditional cell tower project, which would be good. So how it's going to roll out,
we
they
just don't know yet.
No, they're not going to tell us. And it'll be interesting, too, to see if, because these decisions are based on engineering, where they need these things to go. So it'll be interesting to see if AT&T does start to build out here, if Verizon, like a chess game, will try to come in and position themselves so that they remain competitive. But I don't know how it's going to work.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you mentioned Verizon potentially coming in, and the agreement alludes to other network providers also doing something similar. How would that work exactly? Would they make use of AT&T's installed antennas through some sort of third-party agreement? Would they need to install their own infrastructure on different street poles? How does this all work? Hopefully we'll get more than AT&T as a Sprint customer.
My understanding is that each network will have their own infrastructure, so location will be important. I don't know. There's a lot of streetlights out there, so I don't know how competitive it will have to be or if they'll have to do that. The agreement does allow conceptually for two carriers to be on the same pole, but the first one there is the first one there, and if a second one came in, any upsizing of the pole and the infrastructure and the engineering they'd want to do, it would be on the second carrier. So that would make that location that much more expensive. So I don't know if that will be enough to steer them to a pole down the street, or if the engineering requirement will be such that they need to be in that location. I don't know how that'll work yet. And technically, if we were in a more less competitive world, in a different competitive world, the services in a fiber-based reality, there's so much capacity that the competition is in the service. It's not so much in the utility play of controlling the utility and the infrastructure. It's conceivable that you can have a microcell site serve all the carriers. It's just it's all virtualized. It's all software. So everybody could be on the same pole, but nobody plays that way right now. So although technically it's possible, the business model doesn't work that way right now.
I have a couple of suggestions or things to look out for. First, in this photo sim, they don't have any ground equipment. And I know sometimes their small cells work as little nodes where some of them don't need equipment, or if you're setting up, in this case, 6 or 7 at one time, there might have to be ground equipment somewhere. So they'll show you a photo sim of this and not where they're putting their cabinets. And then they end up putting it in right-of-way that maybe blocks ADA access somewhere.
Yes.
Just seen a lot of that happening in Oakland and Berkeley and San Francisco. So I know permitting wasn't really addressed in detail here, and you're still working on the design guidelines. But the encroachment permit process alone might miss some of that if you're approving their photo sims.
It's exactly why we're doing a solicitation right now, because of that. Now, AT&T has told us again and again that the small cell paradigm, each of those cells will utilize power from the streetlight system, and they're in charge of doing that, and have cell to that Cantana location, so that everything you see in that simulation is supposed to be everything. But we've had some other antenna type infrastructure come in, and they have had to have separate power, but they weren't quite this. But what you're talking about is exactly the thing that got everybody's spidey senses up in building, and that's one of the first things we want to control and have our consultant be aware of is, like, how does it function? Is this everything that is going to be there?
Yeah.
And we'll have to address it that way. Yeah, we've already had some problems unrelated, just on general fiber bills in town, with AT&T showing up with ground equipment in
Just out of nowhere.
the wrong place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just all of a sudden there are 3 big, 5 feet by 3 or 4 foot tall boxes in the middle of your walkway. Wondering what.
And we've already
happened.
we've already told them that if the plan is incomplete, that it's going right back out the door. So they're not going to get in. There's time factors in the agreement for performance, and they're fine, but they're based on fully engineered packages. So if don't worry about that, we'll get that in the field, isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you can't preempt the Telecommunications Act or anything when it comes to colos on these towers. Well, there's not towers on these light poles, but maybe one way in the design guidelines to help limit any future problems is to limit the number of things they can attach to the pole itself.
Yeah.
I know at least the RRUs have to be there, but if you have 2 carriers up there that each have 2 or 3 antennas inside that cantana, each one of those will need. You don't want 4 or 5 or 6 RRUs attached to the whole pole.
Exactly. Yeah. That's
Those games. They probably don't know what their 2-year rollout looks like for the rest of the system in the area, but they're probably going to follow anywhere they can get a fiber connection, even if they have to rent from AT&T, rent a fiber link from their antennas. So maybe that's where we see the next round of things happening is the places that are closest to the existing infrastructure, the existing fiber infrastructure in town.
Yeah. And it still seems to me, just on face value, that the amount of fiber in the ground right now is nowhere near enough for this sort of mesh network. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how they're going to do that. Maybe we'll see micro-trenching. I guess in Sacramento, they're staying under the sidewalk as much as they can. out of the right of way under the sidewalks, but I don't know what that means.
Okay. And just a question on the conduit lease. I know it's unrelated to the AT&T agreement, but are our existing neighborhoods like Bright Park area in Washington, are they served by this new fiber, or will they get fiber anytime soon or access to it?
They'll actually probably get it sooner than a lot of neighborhoods because it's going to go on the poles, existing pole lines.
So when does that? What's the timeline for that?
They've already installed a lot of fiber. Yeah, every time AT&T or any of the, I think it's just AT&T, they do a new development. There's requirements for them to go back and retrofit. So in my neighborhood, in the straight streets, they've been meandering some fiber through there. Out by Anna, they did a big build this past summer, and I think mostly they're bringing it to like apartment buildings and stuff like that.
Yeah,
because I think it knocks out their requirement.
It makes it worth putting it in the ground.
Yeah. So, but our Washington project, we're putting in some conduit over here, but I still think in most of the older neighborhoods that have pole lines, that's where you'll see the fiber. And although it's not quite as attractive, it's easier to build, and I think in the long term. And I have a colleague who lives over in East Sag, and she likes to says there's pole lines in the Fab 40s too. Don't worry about it. So.
And may I say one last thing? You said that for this, or switching back to the AT&T contract, are they paying for the electricity to run the equipment? Okay, is that done on separate meters, or how does that?
Two things. So right now, I think we pay like a per unit cost for each street light with PG&E. So if the engineering allows for them to connect to the existing circuitry, there's a couple of problems with that. One is how the photocells are deployed on a circuit, but let's set that aside. So there's a flat rate. PG&E would probably charge them a different rate, and so they would be separate. There's also a smart meter approach, which is probably the best way to do it, because then you can do it for peak metering and stuff like that. And AT&T tells me that they've been working with PG&E to do that, so that would make it even easier, so that the circuit source, would be able to be used, but the accounting would be kept clear and separate.
Yeah.
But in any case, they're required to pay for their power.
Okay. Because I'm sure in some of these cases, the $250 a year rent will be eaten up if you're accidentally paying their utility bill.
Yeah,
I know they've gotten away with a lot of that. Well, gotten away, whether intentionally or not, happens to a lot of small colos like this.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Zella. Appreciate your time.
Okay.
Let's move to agenda item 4A rather, the Environment and Utilities Commission calendar. The next regular meeting of the Environment and Utilities Commission is scheduled for Monday, June 11th, 2018. Item 4B, any reports from city staff?
Yes, thank you. I have just two items really quick. Just wanted to let you know that we recently installed through a contractor 4 barn owl nesting boxes at Bright Park. And the purpose of that is to encourage nesting pairs to live there and take care of, or help take care of the rodent problem that's happening at that park. And as part of a joint effort between Public Works and our Parks Department, and as a larger part of our integrated pest management program that we're trying to roll out throughout the city to reduce our pesticide and herbicide use. So hopefully, they were just installed, I guess, about a month ago, maybe. So I hear that those owls often will inhabit these pretty quickly, so we should hopefully have some this next year or so and see how that goes. I have grand ideas of maybe putting in a camera at some point and having live feed on our Facebook page or something like that, but we'll see how it goes. That's just one cool thing I wanted to bring to your attention. You may remember last August, I had a report to you about the trash amendment to the city's stormwater permit, and it was our track selection of track 1 for our full trash capture program. And we've just started doing some field assessments because December 1st of this year, we have to submit an updated map. I had a map that I showed you last year that showed all of the priority land use areas, and now we have to show the board where we plan on installing
our full capture units and the types. So we're working with our consultant, and we've just started this last few weeks going out and actually looking at different drain inlets and getting a feel for how the system works actually in the field. You know, we have information in maps and schematics and things like that. But when you actually get out there and you look in the DI, it's like, well, can we actually, or drain inlet, can we actually put in a connector pipe screen, that kind of thing? And, you know, what does it really look like in the city? One thing that's really interesting that we've noticed as we've been driving around is our city actually isn't very, you know, trashy. There's not a lot of litter around. So it's been an interesting process. So we'll have that information submitted to the board December 1st. But, you know, based on what we're seeing, who knows, maybe, you know, eventually we could move to the other option and not have to install throughout the city and go to what they call track 2 and do a combined effort of the full capture systems where these units are actually installed and capturing all the litter and having other programs. Because, I mean, it could be that our city really isn't as trashy as we originally thought. So but that was it. Just those two things.
Thanks, Paulina. Item 4C, future agenda item requests from the Environment and Utilities Commission. I have one, actually, which would be to hear more about this integrated pest management strategy that you were talking about with respect to the barn owls and what the other elements of that are.
Yeah, we should be able to pull, if we can't get it together by we don't actually have a full-on plan specific to that, but what we're trying to do is incorporate different projects. But we have a few different things, like, well, you know, the goats is a good example. I mean, all you guys have seen that around town. And then we also have some bat boxes that I'm not really sure are currently inhabited. But, I can do that. I'll try to get Sam Cooney in here to help me out with that from Parks. Okay. Thanks.
Are there any other suggestions for future agenda items from other members of the commission? All right, then we've reached 4D, and we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.